Welcome to Decoding Superhuman. This show is a deep dive into obsessions with performance and how to improve the human experience. Twice a week, I explore the latest science, technology, and tactics with experts in various fields of human optimization. I'm your host, Boomer Anderson. Enjoy the journey.
All right, superhumans. It's Boomer. We're back with the second episode of the year, and I'm fresh off the plane from South Korea. In fact, I'm a little tender right now with some jet lag. Last week, we had Dr. Andrew Hill on the show talking about all things neuroscience. This week, we're going to transition into something a little different, and that's the field of light. If you recall, we've had many episodes on the show on the discussion of light in general, or the subject of light. But when I made a list of experts in the field of light that I wanted to speak with, this person's name was at the top. My guest today is Dr. Alexander Wunsch, and he is a physician and light biologist who lives in Heidelberg, Germany. Dr. Wunsch researches, consults, and teaches on the effects of light, color, and radiation upon human and environment. And he also serves as the deputy managing director of the Max Lüscher Foundation in Lucerne, Switzerland. So you can imagine I've wanted to have this conversation for a while, and at points my excitement may come across as nerves. But thank you to Mark Richter and the guys over at FlowGrade for the introduction. Now, what did we get into? Of course, we talked about chronobiology, zeitgeber, circadian rhythms, blood irradiation therapy, and really looking into LED lights versus incandescent lights, specifically as it relates to red light, and then talking about the Lüscher test and what that all means. Dr. Wunsch was an absolute blast to speak with, so I want to encourage you guys to go check out the show notes, which are at decodingsuperhuman.com/light, LIGHT. Enjoy my episode with Dr. Alexander Wunsch. Dr. Wunsch, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Before we get started, I have to give thanks to Mark Richter and Max Lüscher for the introduction, because without them, this conversation wouldn't happen. So thank you guys. Dr. Wunsch, I would love to get started with a question that came after I saw you speak at FlowFest this year. And you were mentioning something, what I would describe as a tuning fork. Do you mind just going into a little bit as to what that fork is and what it does for you?
So I think the topic of our conversation today should be photobiology, and the tuning fork is some device which belongs more to the vibrational medicine stuff. So it is not really an answer you can expect from me, which perfectly fits into the photobiology environment. Mm-hmm. But for me, the use of a tuning fork came from a friend of mine, a mathematician from Switzerland, Hans Cousteau. I met him in the early 1990s, and he introduced me into the world of natural frequencies. And I was interested these days in natural frequencies because I had invented a cranial electrostimulation unit, and I was in search of treatment parameters, and this unit worked and still works with frequencies in the range of our brain waves. And so I was looking for natural frequencies, or frequencies derived from occurrences in nature. And so I found it very interesting, this concept, which dates back to the days of Pythagoras. It has to do with the law of octave, and it is this system I had been introduced by Hans Cousteau is called the cosmic octave, and it's a mathematical procedure to calculate the rhythms of, for example, the Earth, of other celestial bodies, into a range where you can experience them as frequencies or as tones, where you can hear them, for example. So if you want to listen to the rotation frequency of planet Earth, you first have to make a decision which kind of rotation you want to listen to. There is the rotation which lasts 1 day or 24 hours or 86,400 seconds. There is another rotation which lasts around 365.25 days, which is called the year. And there is also a much, much longer rotation. I think it's 25,720 years, which is called the Platonic year. And if you made your decision, let's say you want to listen to the quality of the day, then you have to divide 1 by 86,400 seconds, which gives you a very, very slow frequency, too slow to hear it with your ears. And so you have to double this frequency several times, again and again and again, until you end up in the range of the audible frequencies. And this, for example, will bring you to 194.18 hertz, which is 1 octave of the day frequency of our planet Earth. And to make it easier, there is a tuning fork, which produces at 20 degrees Celsius exactly this 149.18 hertz. And there are other tuning forks. I think I have 27 of them for many of the celestial bodies in our solar system. And so you can do some frequency meditation. You can use them for phonophoresis, which is a kind of acupuncture without needles, where you can put the vibrating tuning fork with its stem directly onto the acupuncture points. You can use them for attunement if you have someone you want to talk with and you are not in accordance. You can give the other person exactly the same tuning fork than you have. You both hold the tuning forks in your hands and experience if it works as a kind of antenna for the same vibrational content, for the same information. So you can use them in many different ways.
It's incredible. I almost feel like we'll have to have a separate show just to talk about that. Now, Dr. Wunsch, how did you become interested in photobiology? Because you're a practicing medical physician. Where did photobiology come into the picture?
So now the question makes a bit more sense because I already prepared the ground. So in fact, I started with this low frequency range for the human brain waves, and then I discovered the higher frequencies where we have experience transmitted by our ears. And finally, I was looking for a kind of total experience, not only the brain waves, plus the music frequency. I also wanted to have much higher frequencies. I found them finally in the range of the rainbow colors. And so my first interest was focused on the diligent therapeutical use of colored light. And so this for me was the start where I began to become interested in photobiological questions.
Mm-hmm. And you were one of the early adopters. I mean, frankly, when I came to learn about photobiology, it was through you and through some of the interviews you had done. How did you begin to study this for one, but also apply it within your medical practice?
I would not say that I am an early adopter regarding photobiology. If you look back 100 years or 150 years, then you already will find that physicians got interested in the effects of light, got interested in the effects of heliotherapy, as an example, got interested in the effects of UV photobiology in the beginning of the 20th century, began to become interested in the other end of the rainbow spectra. So the short wavelengths are found on the ultraviolet side, the longer wavelengths, which can be found at the longer wavelength part of the spectrum in the infrared, in the near infrared and longer infrared waves. I think infrared therapy or thermal therapy had been in use since humans had learned to produce fire. Mm-hmm. And since Kellogg's days in the late 19th century, artificially produced luminous heat rays coming from incandescent lamps had been used by Kellogg and other guys from the medical profession. So I am for sure I'm not an early adopter of photobiology, but what I think is different, that my approach today is still that I think sunlight is very healthy and helpful as long as we follow some important rules. And that I, for example, am not only convinced, but I know from my personal experience, I've collected since over 25 years now, that colored light is also very interesting in the therapeutical context, which is something you would not necessarily expect from a modern photobiologist.
Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Wunsch, if it's okay with you, I'd like to go into the aspect of sunlight, and then we can go into colored light in just a second. But sunlight, I know growing up in the United States, I was told to put on my suntan lotion and that UVB is evil. Is there a right prescription of sunlight for everyone, i.e., how much sun do we need to be getting per day, and is sunscreen evil?
There are no general rules for the use of sunlight, and there are several restrictions with regards to the use of suntan lotion from my point of view. So there are there are individuals who should not use sunlight as, for example, the primordial source for vitamin D production. So we all know that humans exhibit different skin types, and there is the Fitzpatrick skin typing, which ranges from 1 to 6, and the skin type 1, people with skin type 1 have this Celtic appearance with reddish hair, with a very low content of skin pigment, with greenish eyes. And so these individuals might be very sensitive to sunlight, and they might not even benefit from the use of sunlight. But there are, I would say, more than 95% of humans normally should get some benefit from diligent sunlight use.
Mm-hmm. And diligent sunlight use, just to clarify that a little bit more for people, is that 20 minutes a day? Is it an hour a day? Or you see some of these people now bathing naked for multiple hours a day. How much sun, is there a range that would work for people?
Well, it depends on what you want to achieve in being exposed to the sunlight. If you look for the vitamin D production, then you have to take care that there is enough ultraviolet B contained in the sunlight, in the actual sunlight. For example, you asked me for the weather in Heidelberg today. It definitely was not the right weather to have any vitamin D production, even if you would expose your full body naked to the sun during noontime. So in vitamin D winter, which means when the shadow of your body standing upright is longer than your body is high, then there is not, presumably not enough ultraviolet B contained in sunlight in order to produce vitamin D. But when the season is right, then you should start with 3 to 5 minutes during noontime. Noontime means that the sun has its highest elevation angle, which means that for the sun rays, there is the shortest way through the atmosphere. And this, in consequence, means that you have the highest content of ultraviolet B, of the shortwave ultraviolet, which is crucial for the vitamin D production. And if you start with 5 minutes exposure and watch yourself after the exposure, and you have no signs of an overdosage, no itching skin, no signs for skin stress, and no reddening of the skin, then you could try to increase this exposure time the next day by an increment of, let's say, 2 to 5 minutes, depending on your individual sensitivity. So to make things short, you have to find out your individual susceptibility and tolerance to sunlight by diligently increasing the exposure time from one to the other day. And an increment could be, for example, 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So for a skin type 2 or skin type 3 person, which is the Caucasian skin type, there should be a maximum exposure of 20 minutes a day, because it makes no sense to stress your skin longer than that. For people with darker skin type 5 or 6, exposure time of 40 to 60 minutes could make sense, depending on the individual conditions.
And in terms of exposure, are we talking about exposing just the face, or ideally as much of the body as possible? Is there any guidance?
As much of the body as possible, because if you would try to serve the demand for vitamin D just using the skin, for example, then you would have to expose yourself 7 times to 10 times longer. You would still not have the same positive effect, and you definitely would have a very negative effect to your skin and the face. So the formula is you should try to have the highest UVB content in sunlight, which is achieved in middle Europe, for example, around between 12 and 1 o'clock during noontime. And the larger the area of the body, the shorter the total duration of the treatment can be. And this is what we want to achieve. We want to have an exposure as short as possible in order to achieve the highest vitamin D production possible in this exposure time.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Wunsch, during this time of year, and I normally live in Amsterdam, I'm not there today, but this time of year, it's quite difficult to even get sun. You mentioned this with Heidelberg as well. What are your feelings on some of these UVB lamps, or even looking at things like blood irradiation therapy, as well as supplementing vitamin D as an alternative to get vitamin D during the winter?
First question is, do you need the same amount of vitamin D during the winter time compared to summertime? And the answer to this question depends quite a lot on your understanding of vitamin D. If you think that vitamin D is some prerequisite for good health, then you would try to supplement or try to irradiate either blood or skin. But blood irradiation, by the way, will not be as efficient with regards to vitamin D production compared to the skin irradiation, because there is a very specific mechanism which is responsible for the photosynthesis of vitamin D, which is hosted in the skin cells around the basal cell membrane of the skin. And this will not be addressed when you irradiate the blood. There are other also positive effects of direct blood irradiation, but since this is not accessible for you and me without the help of a physician, I think it's not that interesting to talk about blood irradiation in this context of vitamin D production in the organism. The question is if you can have some UVB lamps, if you can find UVB lamps which are balanced in their spectral distribution in a way that you have more ultraviolet B than ultraviolet A, then they could be they could provide a feasible means to have some skin-based photosynthesis of vitamin D. Otherwise, supplementation could be an alternative. But again, the question which hangs over all these things is, do you need vitamin D throughout the year in the same concentration? Or do you understand vitamin D rather as a signaling molecule which signals your body that it's summer with high amounts of ultraviolet radiation around you, in a similar way than melatonin signals to your cells that it's dark outside and around you?
And Dr. Wunsch, do you mind elaborating on your point here about vitamin D being more of a signal of summertime rather than a focus for optimal health? Because some of us are sitting here getting their vitamin D tests in winter and being told to supplement quite a bit. Is that not how you see it in your own practice?
So my personal approach is, in fact, that vitamin D, my personal approach is predominantly a natural one, which means that I first try to look into nature and to understand what's going on there. And then I want to consider if it makes sense to reproduce what I found in nature, or if I am allowed to follow a different path. And in the context of vitamin D, there are some good arguments to keep the pendulum, some of the pendula in our organism in a naturally swinging and moving way, which means that under the viewpoint of living more or less natural, it is just the fact that our ancestors would have higher vitamin D levels during summertime and lower vitamin D levels during winter time. And when we try to adjust the vitamin D concentration to the same level throughout the year, then we take away one ultradian zeitgeber. What do I mean with ultradian zeitgeber? There are some signals from our environment, and light is called a zeitgeber. Zeit is a German word. It means time. And Geber, again a German word, means a giver. So light is a time giver. It's one of the important creators of chronobiological reactions. And so the sunrise and sunset is a natural zeitgeber, but the seasonal changes, the alterations in environmental characteristics are also zeitgebers, not Dian, referring to the day, Dian zeitgebers, but seasonal zeitgebers. And if we look at the vitamin D as a transmitter molecule for environmental seasonal signals, then it would take away this function of a seasonal zeitgeber if you try to achieve the same, if you try to reach the same concentration throughout the year. It is not necessarily bad, because people who live in equatorial regions, they might have this constant vitamin D concentration throughout the year, but I think people who lived in equatorial regions, they could tell us that it's definitely something different if you have equalized and homogenized climate conditions and solar irradiation conditions throughout the year, or if you're living in regions far away from the equator where you have definitely seasons in a quality as we experience them, for example, in Europe or in many other regions on our planet.
Mm-hmm. So if just from my own life, I lived in Singapore for 6 years, dead on the equator. And I wouldn't say that my vitamin D levels were anywhere near where they are now in terms of just quantum. But it is the key takeaway from what you just said there, Dr. Wunsch, is that other factors other than vitamin D level will have an effect on how we feel and be more of a signaling molecule or signaler to the time of year than just vitamin D level. Do I have that right?
So first thing we can learn from your experience is that even people living close to the equator practice a non-equatorial lifestyle in terms of the use of clothing, for example. Otherwise, if you would have adapted to equatorial lifestyle, this would have had consequences to your dressing behavior. Mm-hmm. So if your vitamin D level near the equator is low, this just means that you do not live really under equatorial conditions. And this shows, on the other hand, that we kind of have managed to have equatorial conditions in terms of we have 20 plus degrees of Celsius in almost any building worldwide throughout the year. So we just took away these natural environmental stimuli, for example, with regards to temperature. Mm-hmm. And people do not behave in an adapted way. They dress in the equatorial regions like they would dress in New York or in Paris or in London. And so we just equaled it out, or just took away the natural stimuli. Mm-hmm. And this makes it even more difficult to decide, with regards to vitamin D level as an example, what to do. Would it be good to go out even if it's cold outside? Would it be better to not dress according to the international rules when you're living under equatorial skies? What would be the best? So the larger the distance to natural behavior, the more important supplementation, for example, will become.
Okay.
And yeah, this is a very complex question which cannot be answered that easily.
I've been known to ask a few of those. Dr. Wunsch, you rightfully transitioned into sort of the circadian aspect that I wanted to go into next when you mentioned zeitgebers. In preparation for this conversation, I watched a talk that you gave on photoendocrinology, and in that, you said that the beginning of the Earth is the beginning of chronobiology. I would love to understand just a little bit more about what you mean by that, but also get into some of the aspects of light's knock-on effects to hormones other than vitamin D, if you don't mind. Our sponsor for today's show is one of the 2 brands of blue light blockers that I actually recommend using. And I've had the CEO, Matt Maruca, on the show before, and we got into a 2-hour-long discussion, which I think to this day is the longest episode of the Decoding Superhuman podcast. But his company, Raw Optics, has made blue light blockers sexy. In fact, I know they worked because I've seen the test results. And the beauty of their product is that blue light doesn't get in. And if any amount of blue light gets in, that Netflix show that you're watching late at night, that book that you're reading, that email that you're answering is disrupting your sleep. So where do you get yours? Head over to rawoptics.com, plug in the code BOOMER. You'll get 15% off your order. Enjoy.
With this, with saying that the beginning of the Earth is the beginning of chronobiology, it means that as soon as the mass of our planet began to rotate around itself and began to spin around the sun, in this early days of our planet Earth, there was already a very important influence coming from sunlight. So evolution did not really start with the first living cells. Evolution started before, in a way that, for example, when you think about a planet which is made from rocks, these rocks, they will heat up during the daytime and they will cool down during nighttime, which is an influence nagging on the structural integrity of the rocks constantly throughout days and nights in their ongoing alternating sequence. And so it was from the moment on where matter on our planet was able to react in a specific way to these influences of changing radiation conditions and so on. It was, for example, especially when life came onto the stage on our planet, it was crucial to kind of foresee when the next cycle starts and when this cycle ends, the actual cycle ends. And so sunlight was the paramount zeitgeber, because sunlight is the primordial source of energy. And this primordial source of energy causes an energy flow and an energy distribution, which can be attributed to the fact that the Earth is rotating around its own axis. And this rotation creates the day and night cycle. And this day and night cycle leads necessarily to an energy flow. So the energy is, you could say, kind of stirring the conditions of liquids, of matter on this planet. And this is especially important when the first life forms came into existence.
Mm-hmm. This is incredible.
And being prepared is just crucial for all the life forms. So if a plant, for example, or even a bacterium, even a single cell in water is not prepared that the sunlight will come up during the next hour or so, the metabolism in this cell is lagging. So there is a kind of reaction shift which results from not being fully adapted to the temporal patterns in your environment.
Do you mind going into that a little bit more? Because it sounds like if you're not being fully adapted to the temporal patterns in your environment, that sounds slightly a bit like jet lag. And all.
When you come late, it's always a negative thing. So, for example, if you miss the train and you have to run in order to reach the train, you need a lot of energy. Your energy expenses are exceedingly high if you have to run instead of sitting comfortably accommodated into your seat in a train. And this is what can act as a picture. So if let's go back to the plant. If the plant knows from its inner clock that the sun will come up in an hour or so, the metabolism has to be modified, because this constant alternating flow of energy automatically demands from plants and other living creatures that they react to this alternating characteristics of the energy. So you have, for example, when we talk about just about temperature, we have maybe even too high temperatures during the daytime when the sun is shining onto the matter. And we might experience exactly the opposite, a lack of warmth, a lack of heat during the nighttime. So the organism would try to cool itself down during the daytime, but it would have to heat itself up during the nighttime. And this, again, is a picture for all the different activities in our metabolism. We have to be active during the day, and we have to repair ourselves during the nighttime. We have to eat during the day, and we have to digest during the nighttime. We have to live under the influence of stress hormones during the daytime, and we have to switch off the stress hormones in order to give chance to the immune cells to become active during the nighttime. So everything in life is just can just be compared to a pendulum, which could be an example for any kind of parameter in our metabolism. Activation, sedation, eating, digesting, moving, resting, and so on and so on. And you can look at all the hormones, you can look at all our features of life. They are all submitted to this basic principle, the alternation of light and darkness, the alternation of activity and rest, and so on.
Thank you. Thank you for elaborating there. Dr. Wunsch, color therapy and the use of colors in treatments and therapies. I would love to just delve into that a little bit more with you.
Just a second. I'm not, before you switch over to color therapy,
Sure.
I just would finalize what I said before. As soon as you fall out of the rhythm, as soon as you get desynced, as soon as you're not in sync, you will lose a lot of energy. And this is the core meaning of chronobiological functions. The better you are synchronized to the environmental conditions, the more energy your organism is able to save. So you are working on an optimal energy level if you are optimally synced to your environment. And this is the core of chronobiology and all the circadian stuff. And even coming back to vitamin D and coming back to exposure to sunlight, if your environment does not provide sunlight, then you should not think that you have to follow the same rules which apply during summertime. So some people, they just feel during wintertime that they get depressed, SAD, seasonal affective disorder, or some other symptoms in this direction. They will benefit most probably from light exposure. And others, they just feel good by hanging around, being less active during the winter time compared to summertime. So it's all subject to our full individuality, which you can find amongst humans. And so it's not so easy to give stiff rules, but I think it's an intelligent way to look what would be natural and to ask yourself what feels better, the natural way or the artificial way of life.
And thank you for saying that, because I know there's a lot of people out there espousing that we should all get tons and tons of sunlight every single day. And for a lot of us, that's actually quite a stressor to even find that sunlight. So I'm glad to hear that in each case, it may be very individual. So thank you, Dr. Wunsch. Going on to color therapy and how to use it, because I think much of the audience is familiar with, well, certainly infrared and near infrared has been getting a lot of attention. But do you mind just giving us an overview on how you'd use some of these other colors in therapeutic practice?
In a show about all things light, it would be a travesty if we didn't talk about blocking blue light. And one of my tools for blocking blue light at night is blue light blocking glasses, of course, right? Everybody has them these days. One of my favorite pairs or favorite brands out there is Raw Optics. The CEO, Matt Maruka, has been on the show before, and I really, really love his products. So head on over to Raw Optics website and use the code BOOMER for a discount. And back to the show with Dr. Wunsch.
So my approach was a kind of different one compared to other photobiologists. The history of photobiology was dominated by the effects of ultraviolet light, because ultraviolet light gives you a skin burn. Ultraviolet light can even kill you if you overdose it intensively. So it was a predominant effect that if you take light from the sun and shine it onto the skin, that the first thing you will experience is a sunburn coming from the ultraviolet B radiation. And this was also the reason why the photobiologists decades ago were claiming that ultraviolet B is the bad part in sunlight. And all the other parts are beneficial or have no effect at all. And they thought, photobiologists decades ago, they thought that UVB is the bad guy. The complicated thing was that it's also responsible for producing vitamin D. But the beneficial part in the spectrum is the luminous red and infrared. And what is right in the middle, in between the ultraviolet and the infrared, the visible part, namely, would have almost no effect. And I personally started with my exploration of exactly this visible part. My approach to photobiology started with becoming interested in the effects of the different colors, the effects of visible light. And so I got in contact with Dinshaw's Chromotherapy, which is still in the official idea, nothing else than quackery. So many of my colleagues in the medical realm and even more scientists which have more physical approach and purely scientific approach, they still think that colored light used for treatment is quackery. But all those who do think that it's just that, they supposedly do not have experienced the effects of colored light on their own. So I was kind of frustrated by the pill-based medicine 30 years ago or so. And so I was even more interested in the effects of beneficial frequencies. And I found some of these frequencies in the spectral range of the rainbow. And in the meantime, it is beyond any questioning that, for example, red light and the close nearby lying near-infrared light is in fact very effective. There is even a name for it. It's photobiomodulation. Red light therapy is very fancy nowadays. But we also know, for example, that blue light has a very specific effect because it stimulates some specific cells in our retina, which are directly connected to our midbrain, which is governing our vegetative functions, our sympathetic and parasympathetic reactions in the body. So in the last years, I just can witness that the effects of the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum fills up. So the gaps for certain colors are closed more and more, become closed more and more. So filled up, not closed, become filled up more and more. So in the meantime, I think we have a lot of indicators that it's not only the red light, it's not only the blue light, but all the different colors which form the rainbow, which feed our eyes with visible radiation, have specific effects onto certain molecules in our body. And we not only have our photoreceptors in the eye, we also have a lot of different molecules flowing in our blood, which act as photoreceptors, as chemical photoreceptors. So there is enough evidence to say that it's not only the red light or the near-infrared light which is effective, and it's not only the ultraviolet light, it's the full spectrum between ultraviolet and long infrared rays which have specific effects and execute specific effects onto our organisms. Yeah, and so I was especially interested in the visible part of the spectrum, in chromotherapy, interested in using colored light, because colored light is much easier in handling, for example, compared to the ultraviolet B radiation, which can be overdosed quite easily. And it's very hard to overdose colored light, especially if we talk about colored light from green into the longer wavelength direction.
Mm-hmm. And so, Dr. Wunsch, can we just double click on one of these, particularly maybe green, and just sort of some of the positive effects that therapeutic, or some of these colors that most people may not be familiar with, like green or even orange, in terms of what they may have in terms of benefits?
Yeah, let's in fact double click on green. What comes to your mind when you think about green? Where would you go if you would look for green in nature?
Oh, I would go right out into the woods in my backyard in Amsterdam.
Bingo. So if you take a walk in the woods, does it feel good?
Feels incredible. I enjoy it. I know the Japanese have been doing this for a long time and even had a name for it, but I love it.
And I think most human beings get a positive feeling from being in the woods, being in the forest, being surrounded by green leaves and plants. And it's being in the forest, for example, it not only has an effect with regards to some odorous or chemical molecules which are transported in the air. It's not only the biochemical environment. You can find a very, very specific spectral distribution when you are in the forest, and this spectral distribution varies throughout the year. So we have seasonal changes in green, but all in all, there is a very specific effect of green which gives your organism the information. You can say it like everything is in the green range. There is no danger. There is the blue light would signal some danger on one hand, and we know as well that red light can also have some attribution into the dangerous realm. But in the green, there is everything balanced. It's the center of the rainbow. It has an equal distance from the violet and from the red. So if red stands for activation, for sympathetic action or sympathetic effects, and violet represents parasympathetic effects, then green is right in the middle, which means for the organism there is a balanced activity between parasympathetic and sympathetic effects. And this is, in a way, the direction for all of us to go if we want to stay healthy. We should achieve to be not constantly stressed, as well as being not constantly relaxed or depressed or inactive. So the golden path lies in the middle, and nature gives us this golden path sign by using green as a signaling color. And if the next question would be, where do I use the green, or in which cases do I use the green? The answer is, if I have enough time and someone is stressed, this person will experience relief from green, as well as a person who is tired and excessively sedated, for example, as well. The green would bring this person into the right direction. Every time I don't really know what to do specifically, just requires the treatment with green, just as a simple rule of thumb.
And Dr. Wunsch, are you using LED lights or incandescent in these cases? What types of lights can people get if they wanted to experience this?
So for chromotherapy, I always use filtered incandescent light because LED light does not provide the same photobiological quality compared to filtered incandescent light. But I have to specify this because, for example, in nature, when you are out in the forest, you will not only have green, even if your eyes experience a green environment. You will always have green and near infrared in addition. So this applies to almost all the colors you would be able to experience in nature. That it's not just a single color, it always comes together with near infrared. And this is the big difference. If you are using LEDs, for example, in the green range, there is a significant lack of the near infrared, which would be standard in nature.
Brilliant. Thank you. One of the things you mentioned about red light was it has a tendency to turn on the sympathetic side of the nervous system. Is there a danger then in using red light at night before you go to bed?
So in fact, all light which is applied after sunset can have a negative impact on the circadian rhythms, of course. So even if red light would be the light which is closest to the natural condition when we think about the environmental conditions of our ancestors, in fact, when they had light after sunset, it was a light quality with enhanced spectra in the long wavelength range. So it would be the color of fire, and this is pretty close to red light. But all artificial light, as long as it's visible, will have an impact on circadian rhythmicity. And so I would not recommend to apply therapeutical doses of red light before you go to bed.
Okay. Dr. Wunsch, the last thing I wanted to ask you about before breaking today is something that Mark brought up when I saw him in Finland this year, and it's the Lüscher test. And forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But
it's Lüscher test.
Yes.
So pronunciation was quite okay.
Thank you. And
you have the Umlaute in German, the Ü. Can you say Ü?
The Lüscher. Yeah, I'm
the
getting
Lüscher test. Yeah,
I should, for my ancestral heritage purposes, be able to speak German better than I do. But the Lüscher test, how do you use it in your practice? And if you don't mind just explaining briefly for people what it is, it'd be appreciated.
The Lüscher test has been invented over 70 years ago from Max Lüscher. He was a psychologist and philosopher from Switzerland. He was interested in psychology even before he became a student. And he discovered in the late 1940s that he could use colors as an examination system. And he worked on this test, which is named after him, for many, many years and refined it even more. And the major thing is that he discovered quite early that he was looking at the type of interaction between humans and their human environment, more or less. And you can act in communication with others focused on yourself, or you can act focused on the other. And you can act in an active way as well as in a passive way. And this heteronomous and autonomous approach combined with an active and a passive approach gives you 4 quadrants in a system which consists of 4 different types of communicating with your environment. And this was the first step in Max Lüscher's system, that he had the definition, is the interaction focused on you or on the other person? Is it active or is it passive? And so you can, for each of these quadrants, which result from this precondition, you can attribute one of the 4 psychological basic colors. So one is the blue, the green, the third is the red, and the 4th is the yellow. And when I now show you a certain color, and I ask you, do you like this color, or explaining it in the way the color test really works. For example, I show you a set of different colors, and I ask you, which color do you prefer most? So, for example, think of blue, green, red, and yellow. When I ask you, which color do you prefer most? What would be your answer?
Green.
Green. So this answer gives me much more information about your inner setting than if I would ask you, Boomer, how do you feel today?
And that would be a much longer answer as well.
It would be a much longer answer, and you would think about it much longer, because you always would bear in mind that I have an idea if I ask you something like that. Mm-hmm. And this is in all psychological tests where you test the personality, which are verbally based. The one who is asked very quickly develops an idea why she or he is asked a certain question. And so you think even twice or even more often before you give me an answer, because you know that I want to find out something about your personality, just by the way I'm asking you. And this is the great advantage of the Lüscher test, that I don't talk about the content. I just show you a basic principle which has a certain meaning throughout the different cultural contexts and everything. We have a universal meaning of the color red, as well as a universal meaning of the color blue. And I can link the red to activity, and I can link the blue to sedation and relaxation. And I can do the same for the other colors. And when I just ask which color do you prefer, or which color do you dislike most, then you give me answers you would never think of. But you give me answers referring to your inner core. And this is the great advantage, that I can take this test, I can make this examination in, let's say, 5 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. And I get a very rich description of the inner emotional structure of the person I tested. And this can be used in a beneficial way in the context of, for example, medicine, because it's an old given rule that the better the diagnosis, the better the therapy will be. If you have only diagnostical means which refer to the body, then you necessarily have to ignore, or you will ignore necessarily, I think, an even more important part of a person. Because what makes us is not our body, even if the mass media try to tell us that beauty and shiny appearance is the most important thing in life. This will not hold. This might hold as long as people are young, but as we grow older, we will experience that what makes ourselves meaningful is not our body. It's more about our emotions, about our thinking. And here we can optimize ourselves. We can make corrections in the, I would say, in the emotional energy flow. As long as we have a means to objectify how our emotional energies really flow, in fact, and how we respond to others. If we are angry, if we are happy, if we think that our communication is successful. There are so many different aspects spinning around our non-physical existence, which normally hide themselves from diagnostical tools. And for me, the Lüscher test is exactly this diagnostical tool, which gives me access to these hidden features of a person. And this helps a lot in my medical activities and in my therapeutical practice.
Dr. Wunsch, this is incredible. We've covered so much today, and I want to be cognizant of your time. I would love, if you're up for it, to come down to Heidelberg sometime and dig a little bit more into the Lüscher test, and you can help me work on my German pronunciation as well. It would be my honor to come down there and just experience this firsthand. But thank you for
just feel invited.
Thank you for all of this. This has been an incredible education on photobiology, as well as the Lüscher test and color therapy. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for asking all these diligent questions.
To all the superhumans listening to this, have an absolutely epic day.
All right. Now that episode left me with a lot to do in the field of light and a lot of action points, but also add a little bit of fun flipping through a book about the Lüscher test as well afterwards. You can check out the show notes once again at decodingsuperhuman.com/light. If you enjoyed this episode or other episodes of the Decoding Superhuman podcast, can you guys do me a favor? Just head over to iTunes. Just do it right now or whenever you can. It'll take a matter of seconds, and leave a 5-star rating. Leave a comment. Share some love. It really helps get the word out about Decoding Superhuman and really elevating the human experience through health. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in today. And share this with a friend. Share it on Facebook. Share it on TikTok. Not that I'm on there, but let's have some fun with this and get it around. Thank you guys. Have an epic day and choose health.